The second thing I wanted to point out is that we will, of course, allow also questions from our virtual guests, not only here in the room. You can put your questions later after the two panels in the chat box or also on the Q&A box. Our teams will monitor this and then also give the questions to the panel. The third thing I wanted to point out is that we will be recording this event. There will be photos, there will also be a video. Why a video? Because for all those who are interested in the event and cannot join us this afternoon, we will also offer the stream later online on our website and together with our colleagues. Okay, now we come to the official part, and I want now to officially invite His Excellency Deputy Executive Secretary Pedro to give the opening remarks. I will follow suit, and then we will very soon start after the keynote speech with our first panel. Deputy Executive Secretary Pedro, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for doing this together with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, Your Excellencies, the State Minister is Mr. Ndaleo Mekonnen, the Director General, Minister of Trade and Regional Integration of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Country Representative for Ethiopia and the African Union, the representative of the African Union Commission, the Embassy of the Republic of Cameroon to Ethiopia, representatives from the regional economic communities, representatives from private sector organizations, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Executive Secretary of ECA, Dr. Vera Songwe, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to this high-level panel discussion, the CFTA and private sector, realizing Africa's full potential. This event is co-organized by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Office, Ethiopia, African Union, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA. The high-level panel discussions has been conceived in recognition of the private sector's central role in promoting regional integration, cooperation, and ensuring a successful implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. This meeting is also an opportunity to evaluate progress in the AfCFTA process and what may be needed from a private sector perspective in order to fully harness the AfCFTA. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the AfCFTA opens a new era of trade governance in Africa and must be considered as an opportunity to undertake the needed structural reforms in many African countries and to accelerate inclusive and sustained development through the creation of a single liberalized market for goods and services, which is expected to increase inter-African trade of higher value-added goods and boost revenues and livelihoods in the African continent. My boss calls it the Africa Marshall Plan. With 55 African Union member states, a population of 1.3 billion, and combined GDP of about 2.5 trillion, the AfCFTA is foreseen to become the largest free trade area in the world by number of countries. Since the official start of the CFTA negotiations in June 2015, tremendous progress has been made and trading under the CFTA agreement officially commenced on the 1st January 2021. As of June 2022, 54 AU member states have signed the agreement, of which 43 have deposited their instruments of ratification with the African Union. However, and beyond the need for all African Union member states to sign and ratify the AfCFTA agreement, there are still outstanding issues from the first phase of negotiations on trade in goods and trade in services that need to be resolved for trading under the CF and the agreement to effectively take place. The second phase of negotiations on investment, intellectual property rights, competition policy, digital trade, and women and youth in trade are also ongoing. Besides, the AfCFTA is complemented by few other initiatives, including the Protocol on the Free Movement of Persons' Rights of Residence and Right of Establishment, and the Single African Air Transport Market, the SAATM. These are very imperatives to promote movement of business and labor across the continent. Moreover, recent empirical analysis by ECA suggests that effective implementation of the CFTA will positively impact Africa's GDP, trade, output, and welfare, with notably inter-African trade foreseen to increase by nearly 40% in 2045, when compared to a situation without the AfCFTA in place. The intra-African gains are expected to be realized in all main sectors and with strong potential to promote industrialization, which offers great opportunities for the private sector, including small and mid-sized enterprises, SMEs in Africa. And as you know, the small and medium enterprises are the creators of the jobs that we require. And we need about 16 million jobs a year for the youth. However, such expected benefits will not materialize overnight. In virtually all African countries, the private sector accounts for a lion's share of production and trade. As such, the success of the CFTA project is dependent on the capacity and preparedness of the African private sector to harness the opportunities of a larger market that result from the project. Is the missing link. The national AfCFTA implementation strategy is being developed by several countries with the support of the ECA.
Soutien de la CEA met en exergue
of CFTA to improved private sector engagement, including SMEs, as well as women and youth. Since the opportunities that the AfCFTA brings to business across the continent are immense, it's imperative for the private sector to understand the implications of the agreement for their business. The private sector also plays a critical role to mobilize required financial resources, including to develop the necessary infrastructure for trade. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in this context, and recognizing the central role of the private sector, ECA works closely with the African Union member states in building capacity and raising awareness by the private sector on AfCFTA related issues. Further, the ECA has developed the AfCFTA Counter Business Index in 2018 as one of the primary and innovative tools to capture private sector opinion on the implementation of the agreement. This is important because, as you know, in many of our jurisdictions, profiling the views and the boundary constraints of private sector development is missing. So we look forward to full implementation of this index as a means to supporting that analysis. The preliminary results of the ACBI from the 7 countries where it has already been rolled out provide valuable insights into main trade challenges facing the African private sector when trading and investing using existing free trade agreements. For example, results from the ACBI specifically indicate that development of simplified regimes on the rules of origin can improve the utilization of existing free trade agreements and encourage deeper value chain integration across borders. Moreover, to facilitate access for the private sector, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, into new markets and enhance intra-African trade in the context of the AfCFTA, the ECA and the African Export-Import Bank, AfrIXIM, in collaboration with the African Union and the AfCFTA Secretariat, have developed a digital business-to-business and business-to-government exchange platform known as the African Trade Exchange Platform. SMEs and smaller traders represent 90% of all private business and account for more than 60% of employment in most African countries. and many of those include women and young entrepreneurs. Nonetheless, these economic actors are currently disproportionately impacted by trade barriers and other challenges. For instance, they face limited access to productive resources, including market information, to be able to identify timely market opportunities. In addition, most African small and medium enterprises are entrenched in the informal sector and are yet to enjoy the benefits of formalized businesses. Developing SMEs capacities, therefore, improving the connectivity of SMEs to regional continental value chains, and facilitating access to market information, and addressing the challenge of trade finance are some of the critical issues identified by ECA to ensure that SMEs take advantage of the opportunities created by the AfCFTA. Last but not least, and considering the efforts being made on climate action and green recovery, a sector which holds much promise from the perspective of an African integrated market, relates to low carbon technologies such as solar photovoltaic technology and energy storage such as lithium-ion batteries. We've just organized, in November 2019, the DRC Africa Business Forum, which has revealed that Africa can move from an $11 billion or so market to a $271 billion if we move from being exporters of raw materials to exporters of, for example, battery precursors. So deepening regional value development in the continent is an opportunity for the private sector on the continent to play a more important role. I think there are a couple of instruments that I'm sure in the course of the meeting today will be discussed how to utilize, for example, local content as an instrument to promote SME development. Africa is endowed with 42 of the 63 elements that are required in low carbon technologies and the fourth industrial revolution. Several green minerals are used in low carbon technologies. We know that battery demand is expected to increase by 25% by 2030 to get back on track to the 2 degrees target centigrades. As the demand for such technologies grow, so will the demand for batteries. There is an opportunity to link Africa's supply of green minerals with aspirations for greater value addition and job creation in the entire value chain, enable AfCFTA common market. And this is definitely an area where sustainable investment is encouraged. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is against this backdrop that today's discussion can help reflect further and better understanding of the role of the private sector in the AfCFTA implementation process and the concerted efforts needed for the private sector to take full advantage of the opportunities offered by the AfCFTA. Let me conclude by thanking the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for asking ECA to join them in co-organizing this meeting, as well as our colleagues who worked tirelessly to make it happen. The success of this event depends on your engagement during this meeting. I therefore wish you all good deliberations, and I look forward to the outcomes of the meeting. Thank you very much.
This looks like a full house now. It's great. Deputy Executive Secretary Pedro, State Minister Andalo, Acting Director Chiumya, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with tremendous joy to welcome you all on behalf of Konrad Adenauer Foundation to this high-level event on the AfCFTA and the private sector. Let me say a few words before we start our discussion. As a humble observer of Africa's steps to a future and prosperity, I believe the AfCFTA maybe holds the biggest promise for the citizens of this continent and its coming generations. Why am I saying so? No one of us will doubt the importance of closer cooperation and further integration for the Africa that we all want to see, a powerful continent in economic, political, and also in social terms. I believe the AfCFTA that was developed and launched by the AU member states a few years back marks the threshold to this new age. And I think we remember all the discussions that we had over the last couple of decades on integration and the importance of that, I think the AfCFTA may be the closest we have gotten to this point so far. Fully implemented, it may usher in developments that we cannot foresee or even think of now. Of course, there remain steps to be taken before we will see the world's biggest free trade zone in full play. And from my observation, I think at the basis of many of them lies the question of trust between AU member states. If we think, for example, and Deputy Executive Secretary Pedro pointed out the protocol, I think if we think, for example, of the free movement protocol of people in Africa, which has unfortunately been ratified only by 4 AU member states so far. Trust amongst each other, we know that is a difficult question. And it is a question that can only be solved by the AU member states. But let me also say, I think they will. Bringing the private sector on board on the last miles towards the AfCFTA will be crucial for its success. The private sector has its ears and eyes where the states have none. As much as they are the first beneficiaries of free trade, they are also the first victims of trade barriers. And with them, all the others who would benefit from their products and services, their jobs, capital investment, and so on. Therefore, together as CAS and UNECA, we want to exchange with you today on how the private sector can be better integrated in the AfCFTA processes, which are naturally processes driven by states. For us as CAS, our offices in more than 120 countries and 20 of them, more than 20 of them, here on the continent, privatization and free trade are fundamental concepts. As a German foundation, we also know very well about the importance for the development of a country. The German government has been doing a lot lately to promote economic growth here in Africa. If we think, for example, on the G20 initiative compact with Africa under the German under the German G20 presidency, and supporting the success of the AfCFTA goes also in the same direction. Of course, we as a political foundation also know very well about the importance of foreign direct investment, Africa's economic potential, and the many opportunities this continent has to offer, and the hope that trade between Africa and the world will grow much more in general terms as it is now, and certainly also in a way that more value addition and job creation happens here on the continent. I can only speak about the country that I know best. Increased trade and investment with Africa is interesting to Germany, but let me also be, as an observer, be very frank with you. Despite the steps that the German government has made to promote investment in African economies, I think there remains a lot of room for improvement. And I also think that it would be good to see that if we as a country think about development in Africa, we should do so more from a perspective of investment and trade rather than economic cooperation and aid. This is a question that we can only solve and that we will have to solve back home. But as I say, as a humble observer, I think I'm also confident enough to tell you here that I think at some point, not so far in the future, it will be solved. And the AfCFTA will play a role in this. And as we have two speakers here who come from the German industry, it will also be interesting to hear from them what they think about this question. I would like to thank all our panelists for having accepted our invitation. This also goes into the direction of a good dozen of African young entrepreneurs who particularly made their way to Addis Ababa for this event. Thank you so much for coming. I would also like to say that the AfCFTA Secretariat wanted to participate in this event, but couldn't do so, unfortunately, which is due to the finance minister meeting in Rabat in Morocco. Last but not least, I would of course also like to thank our partner, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, for joining hands with us and organizing this event together. The UNECA has been a key supporter of Africa's economic development and transformation since its foundation more than 60 years ago, and it has been so again in the AfCFTA. I would like to thank the entire UNECA team, of course also our local CAS team, for realizing this event. It was a wonderful cooperation over the last few weeks between our two organizations, and I think we should do more of this. I wish you all a great and lively discussion. Thank you again so much for coming. And now, State Minister Ndalo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And personally, it's also a very good feeling that Ethiopia is the host country of this continental meeting here. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Excellency, the Deputy Executive Secretary, UNECA, His Excellency Pedro, the German African Business Association, CEO Korstov, and all protocol observed, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege and an honor for me to welcome you on behalf of the Ministry of Trade and Regional Integration and the Republic of the Government of Ethiopia, and on myself. I take the opportunity of offering my sincere gratitude and appreciation for the activity of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, and Conrad Foundation in Ethiopia on the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. Ethiopia is the second largest country in Africa and more than 120 million population, with 60% young and youth, has huge potential for trade and investment. Cognizant of the opportunities, the government has taken radical reform in different sectors and various sectors as well. The government has undertaken successive reform to enhance the role of the private sector in the economy. In this regard, it's imperative to create a robust and conducive environment for the private sector growth so that we create more jobs and new economic opportunities, alleviate poverty, and thereby contribute to the peace and stability. The agricultural sector has historically been the engine of Ethiopian economy, and the export earning by value increased by 12% compared from the previous year. The increase in export earning happened for the first or the last 5 years. The top 5 destinations for Ethiopia's export in 2021 were Somalia, 9.6%, the Netherlands, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and the Germany, and Djibouti. These are, the main destination of our target market countries. By region, Ethiopian exports comprised 1/4 of export to Europe and 20% of the African countries. Distinguished participants, the homegrown economic reform agenda that we have and which call for a vigorous program of economic growth, reform, and development also incorporates a serious commitment to economic integration at the continental level. As an instrument, Ethiopian homegrown economic agenda aims to unlock the country's development potential designated to propel Ethiopia into become the African beacon of prosperity by 2030. The reform focuses on job creation, inclusive growth, poverty reduction, innovation, and industrialization. Closer integration to our brothers and sisters in Africa, has been a long-standing objective of the government of Ethiopia, but is not viewed as an end in itself, rather a vital component of broader program to transform our economy from agrarian nation to that a modern developed state. We firmly believe that strengthening our trade relation with Africa through AfCFTA is very important and critical, not only because of the volume of trade, but also in achieving the objective of Pan-African movement in the framework of creating a strong and united Africa. We also believe that the obvious core element to build and perpetuate continental integration is infrastructural development. Considering this, Ethiopia has implemented different infrastructural programs to link up producers, consumers of closer regions, and indeed beyond. This will have immediate impact of addressing the poor infrastructure, which has mangled African countries in their trade, their investment potential, even in their tourism. At this point in time, I would like to reaffirm Ethiopia's unwavering commitment to the AfCFTA process and constructive engagement in the negotiation as well as implementing and beyond, which is based itself, African problems need African solution. AfCFTA could deepen and extend inter-Africa trade from its very low base of 15% to 52%. Other diverse additional expected benefits are industrialization, increased foreign direct investment flows, reduced dumping and unfair trade practice, export diversification, structural transformation, and sustained growth. Ladies and gentlemen, related to today's high-level panel discussion, this discussion provides us to share ideas on 4 key areas. First, it helps us to see the potential of AfCFTA for the private sector actors. Secondly, this discussion provides us an opportunity to review the comparative analysis in the side of private sector. Thirdly, it enables to understand the impact of trade liberalization on private sector involvement and exchange experiences of regional economic communities. The fourth and the final one, discussion seeks to recognize the challenge faced in the implementation of AfCFTA agreement and to help and to identify the technical and financial matters as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let me end by quoting His Excellency Obasanjo, that is the former president of Nigeria, who in his speech on the African political and business leader met in Kigali as part of African Union Summit on the Continental Free Trade Area. He said that we need to get a critical mass of hands and minds of political and private sector leadership to move us forward. Before I conclude, I would like to take this opportunity to take once again UNECA, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and Conrad Foundation for organizing this high-level panel discussion and the excellent arrangement. I would also like to thank all those present today in this room. It is now my pleasure to declare the high-level panel discussion is officially opened. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We're about to start the first panel, and may I please call the panelists, Mr. Charles Chumia. I understand Dr. Babikir might not be in the room. If you are around, please let us know. Mr. Christoph. Okay, Mr. Christoph Karengizer, please. And Ato Kabur Ganna, please.
Brother, I just want to alert you that I'm joining virtually.
I'm not hearing this clearly, please. What am I being told? Is Dr. Babikir online? Yes? Okay.
Yes, I'm online. Sorry for that.
Okay. Welcome. Thank you very much.
You. Thanks.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this being the first panel on the AfCFTA and the private sector, I'm delighted to welcome a panel of distinguished speakers here, representing both the public and the private sector for once in equal measure, in equal numbers, right? So I have Mr. Charles Chumia, the acting director from the African Union Commission, from the department that's actually dealing with issues to do with economic development, trade and industry, and therefore, in my view, probably the most relevant department within the Commission when it comes to matters of the private sector. Welcome, Mr. Chumia. And then online, we have Dr. Babikir, Osman Babikir, who is the acting director for economic cooperation in IGAD, the IGAD Secretariat, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. Again, he has not been able to join us in person, but I would like to say welcome to you, Dr. Babikir. Then the third, we have Mr. Christoph Karengizer. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Very good, thank you. He is the CEO of the German African Business Association. And of course, he came, I understand, just for this event. So I have to say, welcome to Addis. Then last but not least, I have my good friend and my compatriot, Ato Kabur Ganna, who is the executive director of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I also understand that Ato Kabur just arrived from a foreign trip. So I think it is appropriate for me to say, welcome back to your own city. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNECA underlined earlier, and as was also echoed by the representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the AfCFTA does not mean anything if it does not empower, enable, and capacitate the private sector. In the trade policy field, we often say governments negotiate trade agreements, but in fact, it is the private sector that should do the business of producing and trading across borders. So if you start from that angle, an initiative as significant as the AfCFTA, it cannot achieve its goals unless, of course, the private sector is at the very heart of the entire process. The representation of the private sector in the AfCFTA process is not without its own problems throughout the process for the negotiation of the agreement, as well as today, and I'm sure going forward as well. But we have to address that. If we don't address that challenge, I don't see us achieving the objective, the tantalizing objective that we see in front of us that comes out of the AfCFTA. So I don't want to take too much time. Maybe I will ask each of the speakers to say a few more words about themselves, if you wish, very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time. You will have a maximum of 10 minutes, and I will be very brutal when it comes to time. Okay, so please stick to your 10 minutes allocation. So I'm going to call upon Mr. Chumia, Charles. Please, I would like you to take the floor first. And I have got two questions for you, Charles. And those are, as I was saying earlier, you represent the premier institution on the continent, the African Union Commission. And Within the Commission, you represent the Department for Economic Development, Trade and Industry. And I think that's the most important one. So in your, from where you are sitting, how do you to take advantage of the AfCFTA and to help us go to the next level, to take us with it to the next level, to create the jobs, to bring the prosperity that we all wish to see realized on the continent? This is the first question I have for you. And of course, you sit at the apex, at the national governments, of course. To what extent do you think we can give more voice, capacity, enable the private sector through these different levels of governance to ensure that the private sector actually benefits from the opportunities of the AfCFTA? Over to you, Charles. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Milaku. It's good to see you again. He's smiling because we were together when we were trying to give birth to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And he did a good job in leading us, especially into the legal text of this agreement. I still remember those good days. We spent long nights together. So it's really good that you are moderating this panel. But before I continue, I just want to thank KAS as well as UNECA for associating the African Union Commission in this very important panel discussion. We also appreciate the collaboration that these institutions have and together with the African Union Commission. But since you have given us only 3 minutes, let me not elongate. 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. But let me go straight to your questions. Before I go into them, though, I want to start by giving a preamble to the African Continental Free Trade Area vis-a-vis the African private sector or the private sector in general. Way back, if you ask anyone from the private sector, what are some of the challenges that you face in doing business in the continent? 2 things would really come out. Number one, they would say that the sizes of African markets is too small. You're talking Ethiopia alone, you're talking Kenya alone, you're talking South Africa alone. So they were saying that limits the growth of the African private sector and doing business in the continent. The second challenge that they would always give was the fact that the multiplicity of rules governing trade in the continent. What that meant is that if you want to do business across borders, 2-3 borders, that means you had to comply with 3 or 4 sets of rules across the border. So for example, if you are moving from Kenya into Ethiopia, into Djibouti, that means Kenya would have its own regulations, Ethiopia would have its own regulations, then Djibouti again. That was affecting the business sector, especially by increasing the transaction cost or the cost of doing business. So what basically the African Continental Free Trade Area has done for the African business sector or African private sector is basically to create that large market. The whole Africa is a market for the continent. We have heard of the numbers, 1.2 billion people as a market. We have heard of the finance side to say 3 trillion GDP. That's a very big market that the private sector can now utilize to grow their businesses. So the second thing that I want to say about the AfCFTA as a preamble in answering to your question is that the AfCFTA has changed what we call the domestic market. Now, the private sector have to understand that their domestic market is not the jurisdiction where they operate from. For example, if you are a business operating in Ethiopia, your domestic market is not limited to the economic or political boundaries of Ethiopia. Your domestic market is the whole continent. I think that is very important for the private sector to understand. Now, coming to your question, I would say that the AfCFTA will belong to an organized private sector. If we do not achieve that goal of having an organized private sector, I think they will have challenges in making sure that the potential that the AfCFTA gives to the private sector is realized. What do I mean by that? It will not be easy for small firms operating only in, example, Kenya or Nairobi, to supply to scale to the whole continent. But for the private sector to take full advantage of this market that the AfCFTA creates, I think there's need that they should come together. That's when it will be possible to have them take advantage of this market. Specifically to your question, you are saying, how do you see the private sector? Are they ready for the market? I think from where we sit, we are seeing two faces or two answers to this question. The first side says, yes, they are ready. Why do we say that? We have seen over time an increase in inquiries about how the private sector can take advantage of this market. No, on the other side, because of the issues that I raised earlier, to say we have not really seen an example of businesses that have been created to fully take advantage of this market. I know Mr. Gena will come back on this and elaborate more. So we see that there is potential and a lot still needs to be done to make sure that the AfCFTA, the private sector is taking advantage of this market. But then you also asked in your second question to say, what can be done? In your earlier introduction to this session, Dr. Milako, you clearly said that without the private sector, the AfCFTA will not give the results. And you are very right. Because if you look at the AfCFTA agreement in itself, it's just a document, but we need to give life to that document. And having negotiated the agreement as it is, we need to take a step further now to make sure that that document is usable. And we need, therefore, to make sure that there are adequate flanking measures that should be provided to give life to the AfCFTA. You have said, what should the institution do? Number one is awareness and sensitization about the AfCFTA. We see this has been done, but it has not been adequate. I think we need to do more and being more specific to say how exactly can the private sector take advantage of that. There are institutions that deal with trade finance. I think they need to do more again to make sure that there is financing available. Institutions like yours and mine, we need to produce more trade information. We need to produce more what I call knowledge products for the private sector in manners which they can easily access, in manners that can be easily presented to them and understand. You and me understand the technicalities of it, but what really matters to the private sector is how do I move goods across the border. I see you're taking your mic. I think my time is almost up. But I want to emphasize that we also need to emphasize the issue of trade information, making sure that there is enough information available for the private sector. Then for government institutions, I think they need to be they need to make sure that the private sector are part and parcel of making sure that the policies or the negotiations that are being made have full input from the private sector, because they are the ultimate users of this agreement. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. I think that was an excellent intervention. Some very powerful lines there. The AfCFTA belongs to an organized private sector, I'm pretty sure Ato Kabur will come back to that. And importantly, equally importantly, the AfCFTA is just a document. We need to make it work. We need to turn it into an instrument. I think this is very, very powerful. Thank you very much, Charles. Now I'm going to go to Dr. Babikir. Thank you for making the effort to join us, Dr. Babikir. I'm not sure if we can see you. Dr. Babikir is from the IGAD Secretariat, ladies and gentlemen. And the question that I would like to ask to Dr. Babikir is, I think we all know about IGAD, I believe, but we know it for a number of very important roles it plays in the region, especially in the areas of peace and stability, or tackling the challenges of drought in the region, for example, in the Horn of Africa region in particular, or in the eastern corner of the continent. But we don't really know IGAD for being that active when it comes to the economic integration area. The reality, however, is IGAD is one of 8 recognized regional economic communities on the continent. So in the parlance of the Abuja Treaty, IGAD is supposed to be one of the building blocks of the African Economic Community. Now the question I ask to Dr. Babikir is, what exactly does IGAD do in the area of the economic integration, the trade-led economic integration effort on the continent? And second, given that we are here talking about the private sector, of course, we have to talk about the private sector within the IGAD region. What can IGAD do to support the efforts of the private sector, the efforts of the member governments to enhance the capacity of the private sector to take full advantage of the AfCFTA? What would be the contribution of IGAD in that area? Let me, hopefully, Dr. Babikir can hear me. Let me pass the platform over to you, Dr. Babikir. Please, you have got 10 minutes.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. And I'm very sorry I was unable to attend physically. I'm now in Mombasa, Kenya. Sorry for that. And the connection is very unstable. So please, my apologies. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here on behalf of His Excellency, the Executive Secretary of IGAD, my colleagues in IGAD and in the Division of Economic Cooperation and Regional Integration. I'm working as Director for this division. And where most of the issues of integration are dealt with. So if I'm to talk about IGAD, as you know, it is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development in the Horn of Africa with 8 member states, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Uganda. And when it comes now to integration, we have done a lot actually on the issues of integration. Maybe due to some reasons of feasibility or communication, we were unable to, feasibly put ourselves in the, but actually, and based on IGAD treaty and mandate of IGAD as a regional economic community, we have done a lot in terms of integration in general and trade-related integration issues. So in terms of integration in general, I wanted to focus on the dimensions that are usually assessed. This is the assessment done every year by the African Union Commission on integration. And IGAD actually has done a lot in like 8 pillars or dimensions of integration. Number one is the institutional dimension, 2, political dimension, infrastructural dimension or integration, social integration, trade integration, environmental integration, and productive resource use type of integration. Okay, so when it comes to institutional, we have actually achieved a lot in terms of putting in place a number of specialized centers or institutions and programs that are solving in different countries and are located in different countries of the region that are contributing to solutions of development challenges in our region. I can mention some examples of these institutions. Like in Addis, we have conflict early warning and response mechanism, C1. This is dealing with pastoral conflict, for example, and other types of conflict. And we have also the center dealing with climate-related issues in Nairobi. And we have also IGAD Center for Pastoral Liaison and Livestock Development. We have also IGAD Center of Excellence for Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism in Djibouti. We have Sheikh Technical Veterinary School in Hargeisa, Somalia. So I mean, we have put in place some centers, some programs to contribute to the institutional type of integration. On the political issue, you have mentioned it, my brother, moderator, that the issue of peace and security. We have the division of peace and security also working with these institutions or centers, specialized centers, when it comes to issues of peace and stability. Okay. So on the issue of infrastructural integration, we have done a lot. We have now put in place infrastructure strategic framework covering 4 subsectors: energy, transport, water resources, and ICT sectors. And we have now started taking these priorities. Actually, this strategic framework is about priorities or projects identified by the countries themselves and by including private sector and civil society actors. And this now framework, we are taking it further to the implementation, especially in the cross-border areas, in the borderlands. We have started now with energy, using some resources from development partners like African Development Bank and the World Bank to take energy, for example, to the people. And also, we started taking the ICT sector also to the people. This is just example. And due to interest of time, social dimension, we have done a lot on it. Free movement of persons, we got transhumance protocol, and also on environmental integration, our center in Nairobi, ICBAC, is doing a lot as providing climate advisory services to our member states, to the end users, I mean. There is also on productive, we have done a lot on productive type of integration. And when it comes to trade now, I will focus now on briefly about the private sector. I hope you will give me like 2-3 additional minutes. But
you have 3 minutes, sir. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, brother. Let me now focus on like 4 or 5 points when it comes to trade and economic integration. One is the fact that we have in place also IGAD current strategy. This is a 5-year planning. We are doing each and every 5 years. And the current one is 2021 up to 2025. And the second issue is about IGAD vision till 2050. And we have 3 phases actually on this vision. The phase 1 is we are going to look to how to apply science, technology, and innovation in developing or in solving our development challenge. Phase 2 is actually about industrialization and regional value chains, and this is in line actually with the African Continental Free Trade Area. And the third phase is about knowledge-driven diversification of regional economies. The third point is about IGAD regional trade policy. We have actually developed very recently, this is 2022 up to 2026, a 5-year regional trade strategy, and it is actually in line with the African Continental Free Trade Area. It is in line with the agreement, and it also addresses issues of gender, issues of sustainable development, and all that. Issues also of climate and building of resilience. Then there are some achievements now. Maybe the first point is some achievements in relation to trade and economic integration. And also within these achievements, IGAD also is trying to also work on the other sector, like I have mentioned about peace and security, social dimension, and all that. So now on the achievements, we have IGAD minimum integration plan. Now this one, we are going to also work on it to align it with the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have also managed, as I mentioned, to do the IGAD regional trade policy. We have also in place regional tourism master plan. It is now under implementation. We have also done this, I mentioned about it, regional master plan. This is this infrastructure strategic framework I was talking about. And also we have a legal framework on the modalities of establishing one-stop border post. We have managed to do that in some cross-border areas, and we are now working on that. There is also a draft on how to establish or form Trackers Association, Regional Trackers Association. This is also in line with the agreement. And we also have also a situation analysis of the status of the warehouse receipt system in our region, and also on the overload control and other trade facilitation instrument. Then we did also a study to know what are the political and economic barriers to harmonization of trade-related policies, especially the macroeconomic side of these policies. And also, we have also discussed with COMESA and East African Community and SADC how we can join the tripartite agreement. And based on some financial assistance from UNICA, we have managed, now we are finalizing actually a strategy, regional strategy on how to help our member states in domestication and implementation of this African Continental Free Trade Area. I will stop here. The achievements are too many, but maybe briefly, I may need to also add there are other supporting programs and policies and strategies to what we are doing in relation to trade and economic integration. And but I just want to add that in terms of value added, IGAD has added value in the region because we have previous experience in successful implementation of many projects and programs, and with various actually bilateral and multilateral development partners, also experience in coordination, experience in harmonization of policy, And also within this COVID pandemic, we have done a lot in supporting our member states as a regional solidarity. And there is also
I did not intervene. Huh? Dr. Babikir, can you hear us? We are not hearing you. Okay. I'm afraid we have to go to the next panel, but I also have to thank Dr. Babikir for, I think, an excellent intervention there. He has educated us about the role of IGAD, probably a lot of it that we don't hear much about in terms of economic integration trade. Of course, initially, I was a bit sorry that he had to appear virtually, he couldn't make it here. But then as soon as he said he's stuck in Mombasa, I said, no, that's not a bad place to be stuck in. So I think that's okay. Now I'm going to go to the third speaker, and that is Mr. Christoph Kanengizer. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Kanengizer came just for this purpose, which we really appreciate. We're delighted to have you, sir. And the president, the CEO of the German Africa Business Association, I thought I would ask you some specific questions related to the association of which you are the CEO and German business in general. So you are sitting and observing the AfCFTA process from, should I call it a safe distance, yeah, from Berlin? And how do you see that process about the AfCFTA as someone based in Germany? And of course, the AfCFTA is not just about trade. It's about investment. It's about services. It's about intellectual property. It's about digitalization. It's about everything else. So when we talk about investment, for example, an area of interest for all of us in Africa is to attract good quality investment from abroad, Germany being one. So what would be in your assessment, what is the level of the interest of the German business to invest on the continent? In what sectors? A final one and an important one, I have to say, and because Ato Kabur is sitting next to you, as someone who has been leading a business association, lobbying government to do what you want them to do, to take you seriously in what they are doing, what would be the lesson that African business associations, such as the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce Industry, can learn from your experience over the years? Over to you, Mr. Kanengizer. You have got 10 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this wonderful opportunity to discuss about AfCFTA here in Addis. So the first question you asked me was, what about German African Business Association and what is our perspective on AfCFTA and the AfCFTA process? First of all, let me mention just in a few words what Afrika-Verein, the German African Business Association, is all about. We are the network and the lobby organization of German companies doing business in Africa. So we are representing big multinational companies, which you all know, like Volkswagen, Mercedes, like Siemens, like Bosch, like Deutsche, like Allianz. But we are also representing the broad-based German Mittelstand, so the small and medium-sized companies. And Germany is well known for having a roster of small and medium-sized companies being active globally, so internationalized SMEs. And those SMEs are also member of the German African Business Association when they do business in Africa. The second point I would like to make is that I want to encourage the African states to go on this path of free trade and market integration. I think this is a very important and good signal in these times, because from my perspective and from the perspective of German companies, deglobalization, protectionism is not the right answer to the challenges of the 21st century. We need more trade, and we definitely need more trade between Europe and Africa for one very simple reason. Africa has everything what we don't have, and Europe has a lot of what Africa needs. And this is the best argument for intensive trade between Europe and Africa. You have a young and growing population. You have renewable energy all over the continent. Europe needs energy, and Europe has more and more an aging and shrinking population. But Europe has technology and capital. So bringing all these assets, the assets of the African continent together with the assets of the European continent makes a lot of sense. So what I see is not only having AfCFTA as an opportunity for Africa and for more trade within Africa, but also as a basis for more trade among Africa and Europe, because we need a partner when we want to build, and I think this should be our vision, a European African free trade zone in the future. So currently, AfCFTA is still very abstract to German companies, but it is an important signal, and it stimulates that even German companies are looking much closer to Africa than they did before this initiative has been taken. Second question you asked me was about potential and current and potential German investment on the African continent. So first of all, German investment in Africa is growing slowly but steadily. So we have currently about 12 billion euro invested capital on the African continent. This is by far less than Germany could do in Africa, given the fact that, for instance, France has invested more than 4 times more capital here in Africa than Germany does. Also, the UK or China has invested much more in Africa than Germany. But German investment is quite different from French, Chinese, UK investment, as Germany is not investing in commodities. We are not investing in mining. We are investing in industrial projects. We are investing in local content, and we are investing in industrial production, namely in the Republic of South Africa and in North African states, but more and more also in other countries like Nigeria or Ghana or even Ethiopia. So German investment is more capital intensive. German investment is more demanding, but German investment is also bringing more local content to Africa than investments from other countries investing namely in mining and in commodities. This is one important difference. The second important difference is that this kind of investment is asking for big markets. When we look, for instance, at automotive industry, one big plant of a company like Volkswagen needs about 500,000 cars, sold cars a year when it is economically rational. So looking for a market of 500,000 cars a year in only one African country currently is nearly impossible. Maybe this could be the case in Nigeria someday, maybe even in Ethiopia, this could be possible. But looking at the rest of the continent or Egypt, these big markets, but if you want to speed up this process and you integrate the markets, it is becoming sooner rational for a company like Volkswagen to build up these kinds of plants and the whole of the supply chain. An investment in an automotive production needs trans-border supply chains. You see that in Europe. The parts of a car are produced where it is where you find the best place to produce it. Also in Europe, German cars are not produced in Germany. German cars are produced all over Europe, in Poland, in Hungary, even in Sweden. Parts of German cars are produced. So when you want the whole continent to take advantage of these kinds of investments, you have to open the borders and to integrate the markets. Then it becomes much more interesting for these kinds of high value investments, for instance, from German companies. So I think that from the point of view of foreign direct investment, AfCFTA is the project we need, but also regional integration, even closer regional integration within the African continent is an important issue for producing German companies. And last point, of course, companies are looking also not only for production markets, but also for production sites. They are also looking for sales markets. And if you stimulate by market integration growth in Africa, and when you stimulate growing middle classes in Africa, Africa is also becoming more interesting as a sales market. And great sales markets are investment destinations for local demand at the same time. So I think, namely from the perspective of German industry, this AfCFTA project is something which is absolutely critical to stimulate and to speed up investment here on the African continent. And the last question was about the political dialogue between German industry and the German government. I would say from an outside perspective, it is working extremely good in Germany. We have what we call social dialogue. We have strong business associations. We have strong trade unions. Even currently in this complicated situation with inflation rates near to 10%, we have a dialogue between, so a tripartite dialogue between government, trade unions, and business associations about how the different interest groups can work together to not stimulate more inflation in collective bargaining processes, for instance. From the internal side, of course, it is always complicated. The industry always wants the government to be less bureaucratic, to lower taxes, to lower bureaucratic hurdles. This is all over the world, the same story. But I think trying to find out what is the agenda of policymakers is extremely important for business people, for companies, but namely for business associations. And trying to make clear that industry and the private sector is able to help government to achieve their targets is something which is extremely important. So I would say that a very confrontative a dialogue between government and private sector is not productive. I think both sides have to learn that there is a different logic when you are the CEO of an important company as when you are a policymaker in a democratic state where you need majorities of all social groups within a society. But I think one of the main points in Germany is that the private sector is committed to work together in business associations. Germany is well known for having strong business associations in different fields. And this is one, I think, of the reasons why the dialogue between policy and industry works relatively good in Germany.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karenziger. I think those of us who have been working on the AfCFTA project for a long time, including starting in 2015-16, that Charles was talking about, trying to draft a template agreement to pass over to the governments, to the intergovernmental process. We have been trying to make the case for the AfCFTA in different ways, but I think you made it very powerfully today. The AfCFTA is a trade agreement, but in fact, the most powerful argument for it, I think, is its capacity to make large-scale investment feasible and possible and attractive. And I think you made that point very, very powerfully, among others. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to invite Ato Kaburganna, the Executive Director of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I know PASI, I think we pronounce it, has been very active in different platforms on the AfCFTA, on the Continental Integration Project. And I have got two questions for Ato Kabur today. The first I think is something that we have all alluded to earlier. To what extent is the African private sector, first I think we have to ask, to what extent is it organized? Charles was saying earlier, the AfCFTA belongs to organized labor, organized industry. To what extent are we ready for that? What role do you think the private sector had in the run-up to the AfCFTA, from negotiation to conclusion, adoption, ratification, and now implementation? And a final question, allow me to dream and imagine I have a magic wand to turn this audience into the 55 heads of state of Africa. If I were to ask you to tell them 3 things that they should focus on in order to assist the business community on the continent, what would they be? Thank you very much. You have got 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Ato Malaku. And I would also join actually the previous speakers in thanking the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the UNECA for inviting me at least to share my reflections on the private sector role in the building of the AfCFTA and also in the implementation of the AfCFTA. I would like at the outset to say that if we go around and ask the private sector what is the AfCFTA, I think we will find various funny responses. Some will say it's a country, some will say it's a piece of equipment. So we are really far from bringing the business community to understand actually what is the AfCFTA and as an agreement what its impact will be on business. The usual actually concern of business when we talk about free trade, there is of course the element of import-export. I think basically this is what the AfCFTA to a great extent is all about, without really involving actually the movement of people, you know, the investment protocols and so on and so forth. The concern is usually very mundane, actually, very practical. It's always a problem with customs. It's always a problem with corruption, always a problem with regulations, actually, that somewhat makes it difficult, actually, for a business person or for a business company to move its goods from one country to another. And although the AfCFTA is really an agreement that would make it easier for businesses actually to move their goods or to move their capital from one place to another, I think we have to understand that it is really a journey. It's not really a destination. The agreement was signed, as you know, in 2018. We are in 2022, and in the middle actually of it, when the momentum actually was starting to galvanize the continent, we had the COVID-19 actually problem. And that somewhat dampened the momentum of the AfCFTA, and I'm sure many of you would agree with me. That is really a very, a very difficult challenge for those who are working on the AfCFTA, that their expectation has somewhat been not up to their goal. Nevertheless, actually, the AfCFTA is still under negotiation. The problem from the business side is always that things are not moving as fast as they should really go fast. Anyway, I think there is an uncertainty. The more we delay actually the implementation of the AfCFTA, the more the business community will itself be somewhat less enthusiastic about it. The involvement of the private sector in the discussion of the AfCFTA, but also in the discussion between government and the private sector, it's not like Germany, I would say. I mean, I would like actually to have that German model actually, put up in Africa. But no, there is still, I think, a great deal of gap between the private sector and the government. The tradition actually of sitting together and trying to address problem together has not yet been developed actually. And so that has always been reflected in the AfCFTA. I think the discussion truly has to be conducted by government, there's no question about it. But somehow the briefing, the debriefing, and also the comments of the private sector in many places have been lacking. Of course, when we talk about Africa, you have to be quite careful that this does not really concern the entire African countries. And there are some countries actually that have been very closely involved in at the various level of the negotiations. And we can sort of mention countries like Mauritius, South Africa, Morocco. But the majority actually of the countries have not really been very much involved in the discussions or even in the aftermath actually of the decisions that were taken. As I said, the problems are mundane for African businesses. what is expected actually from a business perspective to move goods from one place to another. As I said earlier, problems around customs, but the major problem also has been logistics. Logistics has been one of the lacking infrastructure in facilitating exchange of goods from one place to another. And some examples would say, for example, that in terms of roads, asphalted roads, for countries that are considered with very low revenue, you know, the study shows that only 318 meters per 1,000 people. For emerging countries, that will jump to 1,000 meters for 1,000 people. And for developed countries, for example, like France, the figure goes to 15,000 meters for 1,000. So that shows actually there is a big need that needs to be sort of met in that area. The other problem is also the issue of productive capacity. Actually, yes, you have an agreement of the AfCFTA, but if you don't have that capacity to produce and also sell, then that agreement is not really very valuable. And just to give you an example, two countries actually that came to that I looked into, Morocco, for example, which exports goods not only in Africa, but across the globe, export something like 80 plus lines of products, 80 plus. And countries like Chad, 82% of their export comes from one product, and that is oil. And so you would expect, how can actually these two countries come together actually in this big world of free trade, of competition? Is it going to work actually? And so there is this issue that one has also to address, the issue of solidarity. And I don't know to what extent that issue has been really sort of brought up into the fore, but it is an important issue, because when you look at the European Union, countries like Portugal or Ireland actually made it to the level where they are now because of this solidarity that the European Union has offered, not only to them, but also to other similar countries. And so we have taken, it seems, and this is, I'm talking from the business perspective, 54 countries, or 55, to be politically correct. When you have 55 countries at different level of development, some more advanced than others, there will be obviously some winners and some losers. And so will the continent be able to maintain that integration into the future? And this is where actually we, as citizens of Africa, has really to start thinking about what kind of Africa we would want to have. Because as I said, without really helping each other, this AfCFTA will not be easy to implement. Now, finally, I would be brief, and I will tell you a bit of what we do at the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We represent something like 54 countries or 55 countries. And my sales speech is always like, if you want, for example, to put a poster in across the continent, we are perhaps one of the only organizations that can do that within a week, actually. So that is really an indication that the Pan-African Chamber is really a very useful institution, but it is a very weak institution, I have to admit, actually, because it is reflective of its own national chambers. We have some strong national chambers, we have some weak national chambers, and we don't have that tradition that the Germans had actually in terms of sitting together, putting up studies, working with government, and discussing with government on any issues that is of relevance to the private sector. That is something that needs to change, particularly if we want really the AfCFTA to work. And I would call actually the support organizations like the AU and UNECA. I think they have to work closely with organizations like ours, not just the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce, but also other business associations. And that relationship has to be really institutionalized, not really on an ad hoc basis when there is a need actually to do a particular work or particular study or attend a particular meeting. I think the good example is the one that I always refer to, the Euro Chamber in Europe, actually. Nothing out, and I can tell you this because I've had quite a few discussions with those responsible in that chamber. Literally everything that goes through the European Union in terms of issues that addresses the private sector has to go through a review by the Euro Chamber. One institution, but that doesn't mean the Euro Chamber is the only institution that's, as it was said earlier, the only institution that is really representing the entire the entire European companies. No, it is not. But you need really, in my opinion, to have one continental organization, 2, 3 continental organizations with which to work on very closely. If not, I would say it's very difficult to make this thing work. And I think I have to make this clear actually to all. Finally, what I would say is I think we should all be excited about it. I mean, this is a project that has started in the 1990s or late 80s by, what we call African fathers, actually. And you can imagine those leaders in those times talking about, and I'm not talking just the 1980s, even going back actually into the 1960s. Those leaders actually thinking about one Africa, one united Africa. And I think the new generation has to take on that challenge and make that a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ato Kabur. I think this was another very powerful intervention. A number of very, very important points. Of course, the lack of awareness that you mentioned in the business community is important, and I think we have to address that. That should be part of our challenge. Companies, business people who are not aware of the AfCFTA cannot be expected to make use of the AfCFTA. But that I think must be the starting point. And your point about the diversity of experience in Africa, that some countries carry the business community better than others. I think this is also something we have to take into account. I'm not trying to summarize an excellent intervention that you made, but I think I like the way you ended, that we have to be excited about it. Please tell the members exactly that language wherever you go. Thank you very much, Ato Kabur. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree with me that this has been an excellent panel. I don't know, Beno, how much time I have. I know we have taken slightly longer, but I hope I still have a few minutes for questions and answers. So with your permission, I'm going to open the floor for a few interventions, questions, comments from the audience. All I would ask is, if you want me to allow to give a chance to more people, those of you who are going to get the chance, please limit yourself to a few comments and a maximum of 2 minutes. Okay? So any comments, views, etc. Yes, I will allow Ambassador Matata to take the floor first. Ambassador, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. I hope you will give me 3.5 minutes because I'm representing a REC, Regional Economic Community, made of 21 countries, including Ethiopia. So you cannot avoid to give me that favor.
I work for the UN, sir. So the moment you mention governments, I stand up.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have three three messages. The first message is to say that this topic for COMESA is an exciting topic. Why? Because COMESA does involve the private sector. And to focus on the issues we are discussing, COMESA has involved the private sector, especially in the building of the trade facilitation instruments through, for instance, the custom guarantee, the insurance, the non-tariff barrier elimination, and of course, the clearinghouse to promote the use of national currencies. But COMESA also involves the private sector through the institutions that support trade and investment. And you know them, the Trade and Development Bank, the reinsurance company, the insurance company, the Competition Commission, and of course, the Investment Promotion Institution. Those institutions are at the service, not only of COMESA people, but they have gone beyond. Like the reinsurance companies covering 42 countries in Africa. That is my first message. So for us, the private sector has a voice. We even host the secretariat of the COMESA Business Council. We do give the floor to the chair of the Business Council at the summit. That person speaks, addresses the heads of state. My second message, Chairperson, is that we are not foreigner to the CFTA. We are pioneer, we're a free trade area since 2000. We participated in the negotiation, although we know it is a country-driven process, but we were there to support, to advise, especially that, and I'm sure you know it, that most of the documents which were basis for negotiation were the document of the tripartite, COMESA, ESC, and SADC. My actually third and the final message is really to thank the panelists. I think I have got one message which I really like from the chairperson of the Chamber of Commerce. Solidarity, yes, we do apply that principle through what we call the variable geometry, but also to support those so-called weak economies. But I also like your message, President, to say, let's remain excited. And in fact, for us, and that this is an advice to the CFTA, it's okay if you are not yet trading under CFTA regime, but then continue trading under COMESA regime. There's nothing bad. So we built on what is already in progress. But I also like the experience of Germany. We know that really the big part of the economy in Africa is that they are small scale industries. So that internationalization of SME, we can perhaps use it to say Africanization of SME. But lastly, Chairperson, I think the CFTA, even if it is not there, we are there, it should develop a private sector strategy. And that private sector strategy should really focus on the role of the business communities in terms of advocacy, but also building the evidence for enforcement of the CFTA agreement. I stop there, Chairperson. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay, I see Dr. Atamensa raising his hand over there. I cannot take the mic away from without giving you a chance. I have one over there and one at the back. I was hoping that ladies would also raise a hand. Yes, please. Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Atamensa, please, and then pass it to my sister behind you.
Okay.
2 minutes, Dr. Atamensa.
I'll be less than 2 minutes. I would rather take the opposite view from what he's taking. I cannot understand why always business community thinks that the government should help them or an organization should organize for them. They stand to benefit from the CFTA. In Germany, in Europe, they did a study on the cost of non-integration, the cost of non-integration of the union, and that is what led to the EU. So the business community, I think in Africa, which stands to benefit, they themselves should go and understand why the CFTA is not working and how can lobby the governments to do it. Because always when we go to these meetings, everybody is saying, get a business strategy, private sector strategy. But I think the private sector is the one who are going to be beneficiary from the agreement. And so therefore they should take the leadership. And I would have wished that such a forum should be organized by the Chamber of Commerce all the time. And we should, perhaps maybe we can come, they can invite us to come. But rather they should take the leadership. It belongs to them. If this is going to succeed, it's them. And so I would encourage them that they shouldn't rather expect governments to be doing it for them, but they rather should take the lead in terms of advancing the cause. This will be my message in terms of the CFTA, because the CFTA belongs to you and you should make it happen. I end here.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the message. Okay, I'm not going to try to separate the two over there. Yes, please, my sister.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stengiswe Ndlovu. I am the immediate past president of OIT Zimbabwe and founder of OIT Zimbabwe. Usually when I'm in such a gathering, I usually ask myself that, why are we here? And today, my answer was, we are here to discuss about the private sector engagement. And what I do realize is that it's like you are picking up a child whom we have left aside for a very long time. In fact, maybe even to start with negotiations, the private sector has not been involved. Why has that been so? Is it because of the political economy that has succeeded in the way we are looking at things? Why I'm saying that is, in the first place, as the earlier speaker has said, the private sector is supposed to be driving the AfCFTA. And that maybe is not rocket science, because even if you go to the Biata Plan of Action, it is based on the private sector, that the private sector is supposed to run with inter-Africa trade in the continent. But here we are, it's like, it's as if it's an afterthought that, by the way, there is the private sector, who, by the way, they're not even involved in the negotiations. Should we blame the negotiators, or should we blame the private sector as well? Well, from my own analysis, just as well, as much as we need to rethink on how we do the negotiations by actually thinking of involving the private sector. I know maybe it's unheard of to have the private sector on board the negotiations, because the thing is that trust between the government and the private sector has always been lacking. Maybe we need a paradigm shift whereby trust is built between those two entities. And by so doing, maybe we have a way to go forward. And secondly, the same thing can be said about the MSMEs. Why do we treat the MSMEs as if they are a charitable sector? It's always an afterthought as well. But yet we say, and according to the presentation there, they're supposed to be driving the economies. Not even supposed, they are actually doing it now. Although that's being done within the informality, that could be addressed, or that is a discussion for another day. But if we are going to actually hail the MSMEs as a significant driver of African economies, why is my observation or the rest of, or maybe even research, it's actually pointed to that we look at the MSMEs as if they are charity, or as, oh, by the way, how are we going to make the MSMEs benefit? But yet we know that if we want Africa to move, it is these guys, it is the MSMEs that are actually running the African economies, that are actually providing the jobs within the African economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have two people, I think. One, I gave one, and over there, please try to be as brief as you can be. Thank you very much. There, over here, to your right. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Bayomi Salami from Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission in Nigeria. My own intervention is just about the fact that it has been observed and is a fact that the 1.3 billion population of Africa comprise of the over 70% that are made up of youth. Youth made up of over 70% of the African population, and Africa as a continent has the youngest youth population when compared with other continents. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you look around, if over 70% of the population happen to be under 30 years old, So we can see that most of us that are here are more in population than the under 30 years. And we are talking about an economy that is being created for the majority of people that are youth. They are highly energetic, they have the strength, they are entrepreneurial, skillful, and they are, as well as in terms of digital economy, they are computer savvy, and they have a lot of role to play. So they need to be more involved in policy conception, in policy development, as well as in policy implementation. So I will advise that subsequent, because it has been said severally, subsequent event that has to do with AfCFTA should be involve a lot of youth, which is very, very key and important. And again, I would like to say that because the economies of the developed world, let me just single out the West and Europe, it has been a democratic, they have been operating an open economy over 100 years. So we cannot compare the private sector in such economies with the economy of Africa. Africa is just emerging and evolving. Until about 20, 15 years ago, government has been dominating the economy of the African continent. And the private sector need to be empowered. For instance, I can cite Nigeria as an example. Nigerian government deliberately have to empower the local, the Nigerians that are entrepreneurs to be involved in so many sectors of the economy with a lot of deliberate policies in terms of local content and what have you, to be able to competitive and be able to even take advantage of the opportunities. I don't want to go into details. Then when we come to the young, giving the opportunity for the young to rule, just about 2018, the current president even signed an act that give opportunity for the qualification for somebody to even qualify to be a president, to contest for the position of president from 40 years to 30 years, and so many things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that there will be need. AfrExim has been doing a lot. I read recently that AfrExim has already set up about $36 billion to even empower and support the youth to take advantage of the AfCFTA. It should go beyond multinational, continental financial institutions. We need to come down to the level of national, regional before we go to the continent. So African leaders need to make deliberate effort to organize the youth. Another thing is that in Nigeria, there's a Nigerian Youth Chambers of Commerce, and all manner of them are at that levels. So I'm not isolating them. What I'm just saying is that the youth need to be involved and be involved at all levels and be empowered at all levels and be guided to make this thing work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give more chances. I've given one over there at the back, please. And that will be the last intervention, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Try to make it short, my sister, please.
Chigirela.
Thank you.
My name is Edith Njage, and I am speaking as private sector and a job creator for 200,000 young people on this continent. I am disappointed because of the lack of gender and youth representation in this conversation, because of the lack of practical, on the ground, actual trade experience in this conversation. Vision 2063, the Africa we want, who will be there to see it? Is it under 30 or over 40? Thank you so much. Next time, let's have the practical product across the continent. I support.
Thank you very much. Criticism accepted. I'm sure the co-organizers have made an effort. So I understand. Beno, with your permission, I'm going to give the speakers 1 minute each to respond briefly. Please, if you would like to say a few words, gentlemen, please go ahead. but limit it to 1 minute maximum, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you so much for the comments that came from the floor. I think they are all enriching to this debate. For me, my closing words, it will just be one word. For the AfCFTA to work, we need to be deliberate. We need to be deliberate in what we do with the private sector. We need to be deliberate what our governments are going to do to make sure that this works. We need to be deliberate to make sure that this is an inclusive agreement. That talks to the issues of women, SMEs, and the youth. And I'm glad to know that the AfCFTA now will have a specific protocol that is going to address youth and women in business. But once again, for this thing to work, we need to be deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Mr. Kanisigir, please. 1 minute again, please.
I would like to put an emphasis of the aspect of solidarity, African solidarity, and mention the European experience with integrating poorer countries in the common market. Yes, this has been accompanied and flanked by solidarity, by European finance infrastructure projects in these countries. But at the end of the day, all were winners. It was a classical win-win situation. Germany is not a cent poorer for contributing to the financing of infrastructure projects in Portugal or Ireland. At the end of the day, we all profited, and namely the big economies like France and Germany profited from this solidarity at the beginning. So we have to distinguish between the short-term perspective. First of all, it costs some money. First of all, there might be some winners and losers, but on the long perspective, this is a classical win-win situation for everybody, because everybody is getting richer by cooperation and by free trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ato Kibru, please.
I would follow what Charles has said. I think the AfCFTA does not happen just like this. It has to be planned, it has to be organized, it has to be worked out. I think what we've seen in many places in the continent is that we talk about the AfCFTA as just one project. This is not really one project, although it is a big project. It's not really a big project. It's really a national project. It's a project that would change the lives of millions of people. So it should not really happen haphazardly. It should be thought out, worked out, planned, implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Dr. Babikir accessible at all? Can you hear us, Dr. Babikir? No. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree with me that this has been an amazing panel. A wealth of experience, insights, and I could see that all of you are ready to stay here probably for another hour or two if you had the time. We couldn't, I apologize for that, but please join me in thanking the panel for an excellent discussion. Thank you very much, please. Thank you, organizers. And now if there are any housekeeping, coffee or whatever, I don't know.